Hi, and welcome to today's segment of the Third Testament Foundation live stream. Today we're gonna look at some text from the Third Testament, Volume 4, and it regarding how politicians actually are using religiousness. And oh, excuse me, could you mute that thing? And just press mute there. So we're gonna read just the highlights here of the chapters we're gonna read, and it's just to give us a little bit of a abstract, and then you can determine if it's something for you. If you wanna keep on watching this, um, mankind's perfect social order cannot come into existence instantaneously through dictatorship. The law of Moses has been unable to prevent the camouflage by means of which infringements of the law were authorized, and the offender could continue to be described as an honest man. The glory for the fact that in modern civilization people can break the laws of society without punishment only when they can camouflage their infringements as self-defense or business is due to the authors of the precepts and ideals of the Old Testament. How the precepts of the Old Testament and the New Testament, from being religious creeds, become political ideals, giving rise to society's judicial laws. Politics is transformed religiousness. Politicians are beings in whom the orthodox religiousness has degenerated in favor of the idealization of practical physical life. Religious sects are not far above the idealistic parties. All religious and political movements in the world are a melting pot in which the spirituality or superterrestrial nature of all religiousness is transferred to practical physical ideals. So we're going to read that. It's going to take maybe half an hour. Before we do that, let's just give a little bit of introduction to this world of Martinez and in terms of what is the religious principle. And as always, all the symbols are copyright of Martinez Institute. If you have any questions or things you would like us to talk about in these live streams, you can text or call in to the voicemail 1-941-462-3177. So Martinez was able to create a world picture and worked for about 60 years in creating these world pictures, and he used a lot of symbols. In the beginning he was drawing symbols, and later he explained these symbols, and one of the symbols, which he calls his main symbol, is this one, and it's called the eternal world picture. And we see how these three principles of x1, x2, and x3 interplay in this eternal world picture. x1 is the white eternal identity that we all are at our core. Then we have x2, the violet creative power, and x3 is the six colors here, the created worlds, the manifested forms that we know as the three physical realms of the mineral kingdom, plant kingdom, and animal kingdom. The three bottom realms and the three top realms is the spiritual realms or spiritual kingdoms or life zones, and those are the real human kingdom, the kingdom of wisdom, and the divine world. Evolution goes in spiral cycles, and this symbol they go counterclockwise, and one round in this evolutionary spiral is constitutes one round in the spiral. So anyway, we see that the planet is here going towards the real human kingdom, and the entrance to which is this star, symbolizing cosmic birth, or the great birth, the activation of the intuition body. We see that the planet has a field around it, and that constitutes all the categories of consciousness of the living beings on the planet, including humans, and we see that there are living beings at different evolutionary stages. So some people are more evolved than others, but that is just a relative concept. It's not that they are more valuable or anything like that. It's just that that's how things are right now. But this is a dynamic concept, so evolution keeps moving and driving people, living beings, forward, and eventually this planet Earth will reach this star. Take about 3,000 years, could be sooner, could be 2,000 years, who knows. But we also see that these beings here that are furthest ahead, right here, that would take them about 500 years to reach the star. And what is 500 years really, if we think about it? As a rule of thumb, Martina states that we use about as long in heaven or in the discarnate life cycles as we do in the incarnate life cycles. So that means if we live to be about 80 years, then we'll, as a rule of thumb, there could be exceptions, we spend about 80 years on the other side in the spiritual realms. So that means one incarnation is about 160 years. So basically, these 500 years that we need, if we are here at the front of the evolution on the planet, will take us about, what, 3 incarnations, approximately 3 to 4 incarnations before we're at this level or evolutionary stage where the intuition body gets activated and we will experience cosmic consciousness. The beings that are further back, of course, takes more incarnations, but we will all go through the same to get to the same level. So basically, we need to evolve love in order to attain cosmic consciousness. We see how this orange tapers off, the orange symbolizing the killing principle, the explosion energy, the gravity energy, and we see how the yellow increases, the yellow symbolizing the neighborly love, compassion, and all loving nature. So with that in mind, I think we should just start reading. Oh yeah, I just wanted to show you this. We see again how evolution goes forward here, and these this symbol symbolize, well, it's called the principle of world redemption. We see how these symbolize the world religions. Could be Christianity, the Middle, Buddhism, Islam, but it basically includes all religions, world religions, Hinduism, and whatever else are there. We see how there are orange, and then there's yellows, and then there's white. So evolution will drive people at these different evolutionary steps towards the white, and the white symbolizes the spiritual side, which means that we are not more in the yellow, which is the religious principle or the religious zone of evolution, where it's enough to believe and have faith in things, but we need, in the white, we need to have proof, we need to have evidence, we need to have science, research, and replicable experiments, so we know for sure that this is how it is, and not just because one person say it, because we can actually verify for ourselves that this is indeed the case, and that will lead to the spiritual science. So natural science will eventually evolve into spiritual science, including, you know, hypotheses that have spiritual domains or fields. So down here, the orange, we have the Viking or the Berserker morals, where it's actually applauded to kill, and The yellow is the humane religions, where we're using the love thy neighbor as yourself principle, and then the white is the spiritual science, natural sciences. So without further ado, we'll just start reading the text for today. But since nothing can be born fully grown, neither mankind's perfect social order, the individual's feeling of absolute interdependence, nor the reciprocal feeling of complete brotherhood towards their neighbor can come into existence instantaneously and miraculously by dictatorship or command. This mental state, life's most perfect and absolutely most glorious art form, or this culmination of the manifestation of love, cannot, on account of its greatness, no less than anything else can, come into existence unless through evolution, training, and experience. When we look back on the history of mankind over the centuries, we therefore also see how mankind's humaneness, from being mere theory, seeds sown in and adapted to people's mind by prophets, wise men, and world redeemers, must go through many different stages, and only after such a gradual evolution become increasingly fundamental to their daily lives. We have already dwelt on the ideals mentioned in the Old Testament. We saw how business morality, or the cultivation of the false business principle, was a transitional stage between the open use of undisguised, coarse, and brute force and the more hidden state, camouflaged and authorized as morality, that we today express as modern culture. Today, the law of Moses, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, is manifested in the form of our judicial legislative system and our administration of justice. The individual's mutual urge to punish and seek vengeance is as yet so overwhelming that it must still be adjusted or authorized by the authorities so as to find vent in sheer barbaric, violent anarchy. The desire to seize and possess our neighbor's goods and gold is still so dominant among terrestrial human beings that in face of this, one must protect oneself by employing the concept of punishment of the law of Moses or the Old Testament. Indeed, we even see here that this has been completely unable to overcome the coarse animal primordial drive in the human being, which impels him to appropriate goods and comforts at any price, quite regardless of how much this may cost his surroundings or his neighbor in terms of loss of freedom and well-being. By camouflaging his seizure of his neighbor's goods, assets, or property as business, he thus kept open a channel or avenue by means of which he could continue to plunder and steal from his neighbor and still be described as an honest man. Indeed, this camouflage developed so much that the camouflaged robbery and defrauding of his neighbor, as already mentioned repeatedly, actually became authorized and protected by law. And this authorization became the foundation for the entire present civilization of mankind. In this civilization, people have thus come so far that they should not kill, defraud, or steal, which are of course the laws, commands, or restraints set forth in the Old Testament to confront the morality of the Vikings, or berserkers. And people have thus come to identify themselves so much with these commands that they can infringe them without punishment, only when their infringement is camouflaged and appears as legitimate defense and business. According to the morality of the berserker, killing and plundering are absolutely commendable, heroic deeds or heroic achievements in almost any form and in almost any situation. Modern civilization or culture allows such manifestations only in situations where they can be documented as self-defense or business. The glory for this improvement of culture or civilization is thus due to the authors, the precepts and ideals of the Old Testament. These precepts and ideals have thus long since ceased being merely religious creeds. In modern culture, they have become materialistic phenomena that the beings cannot circumvent in the maintenance of their daily life, in their particular social position, and in their moral standing, quite regardless of whether they themselves are religious or not. While for the Jewish people in Palestine these precepts were religious, for the modern human being of today they appear as political precepts, which here means judicial, physical precepts. The highest precepts of the New Testament or the World Redeemer's interpretations of moral commands, however, can be expressed only as religious precepts for the individual believers of today's modern civilization. But here too something remarkable happens. The interest in these New Testament ideals or commands as something religious degenerates. Followers of these ideals will thus gradually leave the churches, sects, and other religious communities based on these ideals and follow more secular or material interests. The ideals are encapsulated in terminologies and wordings that have not changed in step with evolution or lived experiences. The wordings become obsolete and unbelievable and cannot satisfy a psyche that has gradually been filled with material experiences from daily life, and with new questions arising from these experiences, questions that these wordings are neither adapted to answer nor capable of answering. However, however wonderful and perfect these traditional wordings may have been for the psyche of the people of that age to whom they were given, they must, however, inevitably be doomed to become obsolete, if only because human evolution or lived experience did not stop or remain standing on the step for which the wording and terminology of these ideals was adapted, but as a perpetually running stream continued flowing on and on. It is naturally a matter of course that the wording or terminology had therefore to gradually lose its meaning and become increasingly inadequate for the mankind of later centuries, with all the material of experience it had acquired during these centuries. And we then also witness here the materialism or the so-called irreligiousness arising from this, which is reflected in a fundamental want of faith or denial of all religious traditions as expressions of reality. These beings claim, with varying degrees of justification, that these traditions are expressions of mere naivety and superstition, like so many notions from the past that have not yet been interpreted or analyzed scientifically. These irreligious beings therefore turn to material research, which in reality is merely a quest for the hidden or lost truth in the antiquated terminology and in the traditional, more or less imperfect dogmas. And it is this lost truth that these people again begin to find or believe that they find in the form of political ideals, also including scientific ideals or answers. So the religious force of these people, after being liberated from or having outgrown their religious past, has now become linked to a materialistic present. Their attitude is now no longer the religious worship of a spiritual phenomenon of thought that they cherished quite intimately alongside their official daily material interests. On the contrary, it has now formed a part of or become one with these material interests. The latter have thereby become idealized. But this idealization is not aimed at or directed towards a higher religious state, but towards a more perfect, or presumably more perfect, physical existence. This interest in the idealization of purely physical, material existence appears thus for us in modern daily existence under the concept of politics. Politics is thus intrinsically nothing but transformed religiousness. Politicians are thus beings in whom orthodox religiousness has more or less degenerated in favor of an idealization of purely physical life. It is true that in many cases this idealization is selfish or expresses an improvement of society that is intended to create only specific, preferential physical circumstances for the politicians concerned. Indeed, even sometimes in cases where these circumstances can be extremely detrimental to the natural well-being and happiness of other citizens. But in no case does this disprove that this idealization has not sprung from the former religiousness of these beings' previous lives. It is not the religiousness of the past, more or less, is not the religiousness of the past more or less selfish? Do we not see that even within Christianity, the religion of neighborly love itself, the canons and tools of wars are blessed by its authorized priests and high priests, and people invoke God's protection for themselves at the same time as they implore Him to punish and destroy their enemies? They bless the use of the sword that the world Redeemer in no uncertain terms advised us to keep in its sheath. They completely ignore his statement that all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. For the soldier or the warrior of the Christian world to forget or ignore these words is natural, since he is as yet on a step where his consciousness or mentality has not outgrown the pagan ideals of his forefathers, but for the world Redeemer's own priests, who are initiated so as to be his authorized highest representatives for spreading his divine wisdom and injunctions to stimulate torture and butchery based on hatred in his name, is an even worse betrayal of God's messenger than that to which Judas succumbed. By means of the authority to preach the gospel of neighborly love, or of God's Spirit that has been given to them in the name of Jesus, they promote and stimulate the spirit of war and bless the vengeful spilling of enemy blood. Is this not sinning against the Holy Spirit? It is to be wished and hoped that these priests may come to themselves and become conscious of their sacred vocation at such an early point in time, that they do not end up sharing the fate of those who commit suicide, as was once the case with one of the World Redeemer's sworn representatives. Modern religious sects are, indeed, not so far above modern political parties or movements. It is easy for the developed researcher to see that modern religiousness is here becoming more or less material in nature, is becoming increasingly political. And there are even specific examples of initiated priests who, besides their vocation as priests, engage in politics in an outstanding way, allowing themselves to be elected or proclaimed as an authority within one political movement or another. Surely, a more concrete proof of the transformation of religiousness into material, physical interest and manifestation could not exist. and the last section here, this entire development of religious and political movements in the world is thus in reality merely a kind of melting pot in which the spirituality or superterrestrial nature of all religiousness is transferred to the purely physical or material plane and is made a physical reality in daily life, while religiousness in the earlier modern culture was only spiritual in nature, which means was something wholly superterrestrial, comprising, as it did, ideals that were actually not at all of this world and were thus something that one could fulfill or be entirely in harmony with only in a superterrestrial or heavenly world beyond death. Religiousness in the present modern culture, such as it is revealed through the modern politician, has become liberated from its more abstract, heavenly or superterrestrial aspects and has become concrete, physical phenomena. These phenomena, it is true, do not go very far in their promises of higher spiritual states, but confine themselves more to promises of improved social, physical conditions, promises of better and more humane laws, laws abolishing wars, promises of a better, healthier, more perfect, and higher standard of living for all human beings, the abolition of artificial class differences, and so on. In brief, everything that points towards making the entire world a common cause with equal rights and access for all people to all the earth's many different blessings and benefits, the development of spirit, intellectuality, and the ensuing manifestation of humaneness and neighborly love. And with those words, I'd like to thank you for today and hope to see you on the next live stream. And see you soon. Take care now.